Hello everyone, I hope you can hear me well. I'm Katrin Falls, I'm the host of your meeting today. We're still waiting for some attendees to arrive, so we will start the presentation in about 1 minute. Thank you. Okay, hello again. I hope you can all hear me well. Let's start the session. I am really happy I welcome you at this point. Good afternoon and evening to our attendees located in Europe. If we have listeners from the Americas too, a good day for you. Welcome to our scene session today, where we introduce you the latest enhancements in the scene version 6.1 and 6.2. I'm happy to have my colleague Simon Horton today in the line with all of us. He's our sales engineer in the UK, and he has a long time experience in demoing the scene software to our customers. So I'm really glad to have him on board today to get you the latest features presented. So I will concentrate on the features in scene 6.1 and providing you with a short insight into the latest scene version 6.2, which we just released recently. If you have questions during the call, please feel free to direct them to us. For this, you can use your Q&A chat window you may find in the toolbar of BlueJeans on the right-hand side. So whenever you have a question during the call, just direct the question to us, and at the end we will answer these questions as soon as the time frame allows. The session will be recorded, and we will provide you the recording afterwards. So thank you. This was the introduction at this point, and I'm glad to hand over the microphone to my colleague Simon right now. Thank you.
Okay, so hopefully everybody can hear me. Thanks for the introduction, Katrin. And like Katrin just said, what we're going to do is go through FARO Scene 6.1 and also show you the new enhancement of FARO Scene 6.2, which aligns to the latest release of our S-Series scanners. Firstly, for those users on the phone that have used FARO Scene 6, you'll notice that with the release of Scene 6, we introduced a new interface to make things easier for the user to understand. In addition to this, we've also made modifications to scene capture and scene process for those users that have also taken on board the FARO Freestyle. So what I'd like to do is just run through some of the basic features first off. And in scene capture, for those that have used it, before it was literally just a solution that would live on a tablet and would allow you to plug the Freestyle in and capture the data. After capturing the data, you would then save that project, move it onto a laptop, and either open it in Scene Process or within full FARO Scene. But what we've now done is given you the option to process that data whilst it's on the tablet. So you can get the machine going if you're coming back from a client or you just want to use it as a spare machine. You can get that processing option done on the tablet just using Scene Capture. During that processing option, it also allows you to automatically clean up the project. So in a similar way to how we used to work or how we work in FARO Scene, we can also clean that data up. Excuse me. In addition to this, we've also added in an open option. It's something that sounds very simple, but it's actually made the software a lot easier to use. So we can open various projects along the way and get those processing as well. We then move on to Scene Process, which, as you may or may know, is a cut down version of FARO Scene. In here, as well as allowing the open option and the cleanup option, we've also integrated meshing. So if all you're doing is doing simple scans and cleaning them up and creating meshes, you can do that in Scene Process. Moving on to Scene itself, in version 6, we created a new solution called WebShare Cloud to Go. At that particular time, it was a manual download and it was linked to your Scene maintenance. So for instance, if you're actively maintained for a 12-month period on your Scene license, then you could update the license to use WebShare Cloud to Go. What we've now done is we've put that in as an automatic install when you install Scene. Again, it's still linked to your Scene license. So if you're actively maintained, you get access to using WebShare Cloud to Go. In the new interface, when we first released it for Scene 6, we didn't have the ability to do full-on target registration. So we've now added that ability in. So in the new interface, we can mix and match between top view, cloud to cloud, and target-based registration. And when doing such things, we had a new reporting system, which we've now modified to allow you to export it as a PDF. So if you're working with clients and they want to see the legitimacy of their data, we can also export that as a PDF and ship it away with scan data. Again, linked to the above, we have the meshing solution in full Scene, and we can either do that through a selection area or via a clipping box, so we've got complete choice. We've now introduced a new processing option for some of the filters, and I'll show you some of those in a short while. But prior to Scene 6.1, we could only apply filters at scan level, whereas now we can apply them at scan level, cluster level, or workspace level. We've also made some modifications to allow you to control what actually happens with processing. Prior to 6.1, when we released 6, as soon as you process the data, that would effectively save and apply filters. Excuse me. It would save and apply filters. It would then create a scan point cloud and it would colorize it. This went against workflows that some users like to use of old. So now what we've done is allowed you to control what you need to do, even down to the point that you can now load and unload scans in the new interface as well. We've tidied up how measurements and clipping boxes work. So if we're working on a single scan, then the measurements and clipping boxes are beneath that scan in the tree. Or if we're working on a cluster, they'll be beneath that cluster in the tree. Or if we're working on a workspace, they'll be beneath that workspace. So it makes it easier to understand what you're working on and where you're working on it. With our WebShare Cloud export, we now support multi-layer overview maps. So if we're using clipping boxes at various floor levels, we can get the system to generate an individual overview map per floor. We've modified and stylized or reduced the polygon selection tools. So we now have one tool that does everything depending on which environment you're viewing the data in. And we've also made speed improvements and optimized the creation for the project point cloud. Because we now have the ability to apply full color in Scene 6, it could take up a lot of space and a lot of time to create. Whereas in 6.1 and 6.2 now, it's a lot faster. And just to finish off, if you are using Scene Capture, on install, we've now added in various drivers for additional devices. So if you want low cost, low accuracy devices such as the Asus Action Pro Live or the Intel RealSense R200, then the drivers are in Scene Capture to allow you to use these kind of devices. But now what I'd like to do is flip over to FARO Scene itself, and we'll look at some of the new options in the software. So because I'm on a web-based environment, what I don't want to do is make you sit there and watch me doing the processing as such. So I'm going to cheat a little bit, but show you the concept of what we do. So first off, whenever we bring data into Scene, we can either import it directly from a memory card, or we can drag and drop it into this environment. And the next stage we have to go through is to go through the Process tab. So if you've not seen the new interface yet, it very much steps you through in a wizard-based format as to where you need to do or need to go. So we import the data, or we create the project, we then import it, we then process it, we then register it, we then explore and modify it, and then we export it into a format that we need to. So if I go to the processing option here, I'll stay here. When I click on process scans, you can see I've fully processed this data because I didn't want you to have to sit there and watch it. And at the top, the option is grayed out. But now what we've allowed you to do is choose what you want to process and when. So if I click on a single scan, it will only process that one scan. If I click on a cluster, it will only process that one cluster. Or if I click on a workspace, it will allow me to process a workspace. So it means that we don't have to process everything and wait for the system to finish. We can do it as and when we need it. If I then click on the configure processing option, in here again, because I've done some things, they're automatically created. But now you can see I can turn off the colorization option. I know certain users, especially when they're using targets or they're going from inside to outside a building, prefer to work in a grayscale environment and add the color at a later stage. So again, we can turn that option off and not colorize the scan. Some users don't like working with scan point clouds. They like to load in and unload the scans as and when they need them. Again, you can turn that option off. I actually find this option a massive benefit because it does help with the speed of using and navigating in and around Scene. We can perform an automatic registration. So for instance, in here, we could import the scans and then we could colorize, create scan point clouds and do an automatic registration without actually touching the machine. Prior to version 6, it will be drag and drop, save, colorize, save, create scan point cloud, save, top view, save, cloud to cloud, save. So it's very much interactive for the user having to wait for a process to complete. With Scene 6.1 and 6.2 now, we don't have to wait anymore. We can set the machine going. As we move down, we have a new series of filters. So if we look at these, we can start to look at dark scan points and remove the points based on a minimum reflectance value. Under each option here, we have the settings for those thresholds. We can also apply a distance filter. So in here, we can remove scan points outside the distance range as defined as a minimum and maximum distance. Again, we can specify those distances. We can also do stray point filtering based on a grid, and we can set that grid and spacing up with our default thresholds. Or now we have a new edge artifact filter. So if you've ever scanned an environment where you're scanning, for instance, pipes or objects with sharp edges, then what you can do is you can set this filter here and it will remove the flare that you get on a pipe or on a sharp edge or something like that. And then down at the bottom, we can automatically find checkerboards, planes, and spheres. So this is a bit like our old pre-processing. So we can get the system to do whatever we want. If I just cancel that for a second and go to our options, in the processing tab here, I can set my default settings based on what I want to do every single time. Or as you've just seen, it will be bespoke for each option. So typically I would go through colorizing scans or creating my scan point clouds, and I can choose a series of filters. Down at the bottom, we've also added in the standard radii for spheres. So we've got a 200mm sphere here, typically the size of a sphere we've purchased from FARO, and the standard sort of soft spheres that Laser Scanning Europe would sell. If I go to the registration tab, in here now we've got target-based registration. So we can choose what kind of registration method we want. And again, we've implemented all the target-based registration settings that we would typically have used back in Scene 5.5 or actually in the classic interface of Scene. As we move down, on cloud to cloud, we were limited to only supplying subsampling in this new interface. But what we've now done is given you a series of expert settings so we can utilize the maximum number of iterations and maximum search distance. So for instance, if you're scanning outside and it's a fairly barren area, but there are buildings in the distance, I typically will up this maximum search distance, especially when using top view and cloud to cloud, for looking for more vertical surfaces. And then down at the bottom, because we've added in target-based registration, we've given you more statistics that you can control by using the registration options down here. Just checking through on the Views tab, we haven't added anything else in here. So what we'll then do is go back into the environment and start looking at some of the next features. So when we're in this environment, I have actually pre-registered this. So if I go to the Explore option, you can see that I've got my scans all nicely registered. Whilst I'm in here, if I ever want to look at the registration results, I can go into the Registration tab and I can click on the registration report here to tell me what my maximum point error, mean point error, and overlaps are. And I can also see the color matrix, and as I scroll down, I can start to see which scans have how many connections and what they're linked to. The benefit of this, though, is if I click on Save Report, that will actually pump out a report onto my desktop, and then it will open up that report as a PDF for me. So in here, it gives me the project name, the number of the cluster names, the day, date, time, and month, and the locations, but it also gives us the coding and all the statistics that I can link in and send to a client if I need to. So it's quite a nice little option there to print those reports out and typically store them with a job when you've completed it, because it means you don't have to open the project again if you just want to look at what accuracy you developed in that particular project. If we then go back into our project tab, what I'm actually going to do is show you the new target registration within the system. So I'm just going to revert my project back to a previous revision and click OK. And then once that's done that, we'll go in and we'll do a manual target-based registration. So in our registration tab now, I've already done an automatic registration, but now what I need to do is do a manual registration. So if you're used to using something like the split correspondence view, or you've used the start, stop, scan placement under the freestyle menu, then you'll recognize this similar environment. We have a selection column on the left and a selection column on the right, and we literally pick the two scans that we want to link together. So I'm going to do scan 1 to scan 2. Then I'm going to click the Mark Targets option. Then because we need to load the scans into the quick view, what it will do is it instantly loads the grayscale in a low resolution, and then it will load in the color after that. So it means it's optimizing what we actually do. In here, you see I've already selected a few spheres. So all I'm going to do is pick some of these and just delete them, just so I can show you the process. I've just deleted those two over there. So you can see everything else has matched through. So we can see that sphere 1 is linked to sphere 1 and so on and so forth. You can look at spurious spheres over here. I know for a fact that actually isn't a sphere. It's actually just a shape that is a similar size to the sphere. So I'd want to delete that before I go any further. And then when we're back in the environment, all we need to do is very similar to how we've done in the past. over here, we've got the new Mark Sphere tool and also Mark Checkerboard. I pick on the sphere itself. It will then bring me up the options. If ever you don't get this dialog box, there's a setting in the classic environment where you can turn it on or off. Some users like to see it, others don't, but I tend to look in here at the number of scan points per sphere. So anything over 80 is going to give me a green light. Less than 80 will be amber, and less than 20 will give me red. I'm also looking for positional deviation and my scan point distance as well to make sure I've got good values in here, which will aid my registration. I just click OK to that one, and then we'll do this one here, and we'll click OK. So now I've got enough matching spheres between the two scans. What I need to do is click on Register and Verify, and that will then open up my correspondence view in effect. And the first thing to note, if I turn off clear view, is we get our correspondence view overlap, but now with clear view, we've modified it so as you're moving in and out or moving left and right, the clear view remains active so we can see what it's doing at all times. So it makes it a lot easier to check. If we're happy with our result, we simply click yes and go to next pair. So now I'm going to pick number 2 and go for number 3, mark my targets. In this instance, I've done them all already, so we'll just leave them as they are rather than go around and do each one individually. And then when these two scans have loaded in, it will then identify and match all my pairs for my spheres, and then we can go on to the next stage. So now it's done that, check there are no spurious ones. It's missed that one there. I could probably use it because I've got roughly 50% of the sphere, but to be honest, in this instance, I don't need it, and I'd probably get an amber light on that anyway. So I'm happy with those. Click Register and Verify. Move my clusters to the center, so just click yes. And here you can see the first cluster we did, and then the second scan. Looking at the results, they look good. So if I just click yes, click Finish, we then are asked to perform an optimization. So in here, because we've used a target-based registration, I would perform a target-based optimization. The worry is, or the problem is sometimes, if you go for this option, when we've done our target-based registration, we've typically worked with a minimum of 3 spheres. If we then optimize it with cloud to cloud, that goes beyond and outside of those 3 spheres, and it starts to use everything else in and around. So it will pull the spheres apart sometimes. So typically stay with the option that you've used. If I just optimize that, click yes, click Finish, go to Explore, and then I can see that I've got my point cloud all nicely registered again. I can go in and look around it. If we go back to the registration tab, we've also added in the ability to import survey points in the new interface as well. So in here, we click on the import survey points, we look for the location of the file, and we bring in that survey control, and then we would typically do another target-based registration at the top level. For those users using survey control, I typically only ever bring this in as the last step, because survey control, or the references folder, is king. If you bring it in at the beginning, then what it's trying to do is put each cluster onto survey control as and when you do it. We also have a new option for visual registration as well. So in here, typically if you're using top view or cloud to cloud, what you could find in the past is that sometimes you can't get the scans to work. So what you typically do is you'd open them up in a correspondence view, and then you'd manually move them around. So this is doing the same thing. So in here, as we click on the scans, we're into correspondence view. So I can change the size of my manipulators using the plus or minus symbols on my keyboard. I can position the scans so they're visually overlapping. And then you saw there that I just checked the option to be cloud to cloud. Because I've positioned the scans in their rough locations, the system then will do its best to register those scans together. So it's one of the many methods of registration we have in Scene. I'm just going to come out of that option there. So we've been through optimization, we've been through cloud to cloud and the registration report. We've also been through and looked at the modifications to the registration tab and how we can also add in cloud to cloud. So the next thing we'll do is look at some of the options for our web share. So in web share now, if we go to the web share option and create the data, first doing a quick save, what we've given you the ability to do is work with a multi-layer map now. So based on clipping boxes, we can get the system to automatically create a floor plan, if you like, at each level of a building. So if I try and replicate that on the screen, if I go back to explore mode and I'll put in an auto clipping box first off, and then all we'll do is we'll pull out these manipulation handles. So we get something that looks like that. Then we'll rotate it to get it roughly parallel with the building. And then we'll just modify these to pull them in and out and create our first floor plan. So I'm just going to pop something in that looks about that level. I'm just going to turn off my spheres and my scan positions. So I'll turn off scan positions and then I'll turn off my matched objects. Click OK. And again, we'll come back to modifying this and we'll just pull it back into where we need it to be. And then when we've got a nice thin slice, what we can then do is that we can use that slice by right clicking on it and creating clipping boxes along an axis. So it's going in the Z axis. As you can see there, it's created 3 of them. I actually want them to be at about 800 millimeters. I'm just going to change that to 1, then down 2, and I actually want 3 of them. So there we've got our clipping boxes, and we can click OK, and all of a sudden we've got our clipping boxes at different levels. So here it would be better if we had a multi-story building because we could create these clipping boxes at each floor level. And we not only see the floor level differences in layout, but we'd also see the differences in furniture and setup. When we've done that, if we then go back to the Export tab and we go to WebShare Cloud and create data again, in here now we can turn on the multi-layer map. So we can decide by using the Control key or using the Shift key to select all or none of those clipping boxes. Those will be saved out and brought into WebShare Cloud. In addition to this, we've also got a Create Scan Overlay option. Having this unticked will save you size when you're uploading, but it's actually quite nice that when you're in the WebShare Cloud environment, as you click on a scan, it will actually show you the extent at which that scanner has actually captured data. So you can see your overlap between the different scan positions. I don't need to export this. I've got an example online already. So if I come out of that and I go to a browser, you've been onto our emir.websharecloud.com demo site, you may have seen this option already. But this was a feature that was included back in Scene 5, I believe, maybe earlier, where we have the ability to have multiple overview maps. Firstly, you'll notice as I hover or click on a scan, this is the area of colorization that I was talking about that we can turn on or off. So you can see how far that scan has actually gone. Or you can see I've got 3 views at the moment. If I come down to the bottom here to the cog and go to the layering options, in here I've got 3 options. I've got my scan data, I've got my drawing that I've also imported as an overview map, and we can still do that and you manually position those at the floor levels. Or I've actually got a Google image where I've been to the location of this site on Google Images, brought it in and positioned it over the top. And this would be the same if we'd done it automatically using the new option in Scene 6.1 for the overview maps that I've just shown. If I then go back to Scene, that goes through the overview maps and how we do it. Interestingly as well, because I'm viewing all 3 scans together, it's added in these clipping boxes at the cluster level because I'm looking at these 3 scans together. If I actually get rid of those clipping boxes If I then go in and view one scan in 3D, then what we've also got is now we've got the ability to add them in at individual level. So if I go back to Explore and I go to Automatic Clipping Box, as soon as I create it, you can see it's dropped it in below Scan 1. So I know where that clipping box is working. I know what it's working on. And similarly, the same goes for dimensions. So if I come into here and I go to create a new dimension and I measure between point on the ceiling, there's point on the ceiling and a point on the floor. Let's just get rid of that clipping box. My machine's been a bit funny. Let me just come out of that command a second and close that down and get rid of that clipping box. And then I'll just look at that one scan in 3D again. And then all I want to do is drop in a dimension between that point there and that point there. So you can see it's giving me the distance, but it's also added in that distance below scan 1. Also, another little thing that we've done is we've turned off the multiple iterations of a distance. So for instance, I haven't clicked in a straight line there. What I've done is I've effectively clicked the hypotenuse and the angle point. So to turn those back on, it's a case of right-clicking on that distance marker, going to properties and turning on either horizontal or vertical. And you can see there that scene has rectified the horizontal to give us the true vertical dimension. Or we can just get rid of that as well. I'm just going to delete that. Whilst we're in here as well, if I zoom out, depending on which view we're viewing, depends on how the polygon tool works. So for instance, in here, we've got one option now, and it's more apparent if I flick over to the classic interface. So if you're used to using the classic interface, you're used to having the blue and yellow selection tools within the system. So you see now we've only got one tool. If I click on it, then what we can do is we can start to select an area around the building. So say for instance we select that area. Now if I right click, the only options I've got are to delete or invert or actually mesh, which we'll come back onto. Because what we're viewing is we're viewing the scan point cloud, which is denoted by the small number 3. If I were to actually load that scan, or in fact what we'll do is we'll load this scan here, we've now given clients the ability to load in the new interface as well. So I'll load that scan in manually, and then when I open that one up in 3D, the selection box will work in a slightly different manner. So if we view that in 3D, and then we place a selection box around the outside, as we would traditionally do with a yellow selection tool. As I right click, now we get delete inside or delete outside. And that's because we've got the FLS file, the native file loaded. As soon as I unload that, I go back to delete or invert in the same way. So it's just a case of remembering to unload that scan. And then what I'll do is I'll flip back to the classic environment. So if we go to explore, so we're in here, Control D will just get rid of that selection on the screen for me. The next thing we have is we've done some modifications to the project point cloud. If I go to create, in the project point cloud, you might have remembered that we gave you the ability to have closed surfaces and full color detail. So closed surfaces are using voxels or volumetric pixels, where each pixel will expand to meet its neighbor. So it's effectively gap filling. But also, depending on the resolution that you've scanned, will depend on the quality of your color imagery. Now, typically, if I've scanned and I know I need to do a good movie, then I would scan at 1/5 or 1/4. But in here, what I could do is I could scan at 1/32 as a resolution, which is a 49mm spacing at 10 meters. But if I turn on full color, instead of only applying individual pixels based on individual scan points, it will apply all the pixels from the photographs across the surface that you've created. Now it can, on a large job, require a large temporary disk space, and it will normally warn you down here if you haven't got enough space on your machine. If that is the case, then all you need to do is plug in an external hard drive with enough space, USB 2 or USB 3, and Scene will use that as a cache location to allow you to still render that information. But we won't do that for now. And lastly, we can then look at the new meshed functionality. So under the meshing options, we have the ability to do a mesh selection or a mesh clipping box. And it doesn't really matter on the size. If I go to select an area around this whole building, so I want to mesh it, and I go to mesh selection and select it, in here we have the ability to create a mesh. So first off is if we created a mesh against a single scan, it will go at scan level as per measurements and clipping boxes. If we've done one across multiple scans, it will go in a mesh box against that cluster. So first off, we give it a name. We then now have the ability to create a watertight mesh. So to describe that, if you look at this face here, if I've only scanned the front of the face and the back hadn't been scanned, if I tick the watertight mesh there, what it will do is it will fill in the back for me to create a watertight mesh, which can then be sent directly to a 3D printer, either as an STL, a PLY, an OBJ, or a VRML file. If I just want to create a mesh, then what I can do is leave that unticked, and then I've got this slider bar. So with this slider bar, we're actually limited to 40 million triangles. Now, if you need to mesh a larger area, if you use the clipping box along an axis tool, which I've just done for WebShare, if you set the distance between the clipping boxes to be 0, then whichever clipping box you select and have active, that will equate to what you can do in here. So you can get more than 40 million, but you can only get 40 million per selection. So it's quite quick and quite easy to do if you need to get out a larger area. And I have been working with a client recently that wants to scan areas like this, mesh them, and then take that mesh data into their computational fluid dynamics program to do airflow or water flow or heat loss or things like that. So they're using the meshing tools in Scene. Down at the bottom, we can have an option where we reduce behavioral detail either just on the geometry itself or on the geometry and the color. And when we're ready, we just click create. What I'm actually going to do though is I'm just going to drop out of here. I'm just going to flip back to my other interface for a minute, and what I'm going to look for is another project that I can use. So when my graphics card is caught up, I'm actually going to go and close this down, and we'll go to our home screen and just look for one of my favorite projects, which is this one here. So this is a freestyle scan that I've done. So if we just go and view this in 3D. So I want to pick, in this instance, I want to try and pick this front mudguard, and I only want to mesh this area. So what I can do is, using the polygon selector, I can trace very carefully as best I can around the area first off, and then when I get to the bottom of the wheel, we'll come up and over the wheel, try and lose some of the suspension components, and then select that area. Now before I go to mesh it, what I want to make sure is that I haven't picked up any spurious data. You can see I've just picked up the top of the suspension arm here. So what we can do is use the subtract from selection tool. Again, pick our polygon tool, and I'm just going to pick around that area, and that will get rid of that. So I now know, it looks as though I've got a little area up there. So again, we can use that tool again just to subtract from the area, basically so we're not meshing things we don't need to. And when it's nice and clean, and we know we've just got the selected area, what we can then do is click on the mesh option. So it looks like this in the classic interface. Set our level of meshing. I'm just going to leave it relatively low and click create. Now, depending on your selected area will depend on how quickly this will occur. Typically, I tend to work on relatively small areas, but if I was working on a building and I have meshed the project I've done before, it took about 20-30 minutes to mesh it because it's dealing with a lot more points. And we're also, I'll put it up to the maximum of 40 million triangles. But something like this should take around 60 seconds, if not less, depending on the level of meshing and triangulation we've got. So once this is finished, I think we've pretty much covered all the features of Scene 6.1. There's also a tutorial online that covers them all in more detail. If you do forget anything or have missed anything, you're more than welcome to go and view that. And then what I'm going to do as soon as this is finished, I'll flip back to my PowerPoint presentation and we'll go through some of the features of 6.2, which is all down to doing the on-site compensation, but working with the new scanners. So that's now finished. If I right click on that mesh and go to the 3D view, and then in isolation, I should just have that meshed front mudguard. So that can now be exported as a STL, PLY, OBJ, or WRL. If you need to do some surfacing, you could take that out as an STL, take it into Geomagic Wrap, apply a surface, and take that into SolidWorks Inventor, you name it, or whatever system you want to use. So just to finish off, we'll go back to the PowerPoint demonstration. So in here, a couple of things to note in Scene 6.2. First off, some users had noticed that we're applying an angular compensation when we're processing scans, which could add to the time of the processing. It was basically a way of fine-tuning the scans to make sure they're closing well. Now the angular compensation will only be applied when you're bringing raw scans directly from a scanner. So if you're opening a Scene 6 or a Scene 5.5 or 5 or 4 or 5.3, then that compensation won't be applied. We've now given you the ability to do on-site compensation to check the accuracy of your scanner. So the compensation is only available for the S series variant, so that's the S135 and 350. The verification allows you to check and adjust the scanner's compensation, and it's available in either Scene or Scene LT. To enable you to do that, we've now upgraded Scene LT to have the new style user interface as well. So firstly, what we need to do is turn the option on. So if I go back to Scene and I'll flip back to the new interface. In the new interface, if you go to options and go to the bottom of the general tab, you have this new show scanning category option. So if I turn that on, when I go back to here, it turns on a new tab in the toolbar. If I go to the scanning tab, firstly, you'll need a series of targets. So if you click on the Open Target PDF, it will open up the target page for you. And typically you need to print half a dozen of these. Or if you go to the Start On-Site Compensation, I've got to close that project and I'm not going to save it. It will then open up the compensation dialog. Now I can't do this live at the moment because I'm still waiting for my scanner to arrive. But in here, we can go through it step by step in the presentation. So what it's actually asking us to do is on our scanner is look up the network name. So by going into Manage, General Settings, and Wireless LAN or network name. And then on here, we connect to the computer and on the scanner and enter the IP address in here. That will then load the scanner information across and we can check that we're using our correct scanner name and serial number and our correct device. It will also tell us whether we're level or not and when the last compensation was. It will then ask us to position our targets. So we need those to be +50 to -50 degrees. Again, it gives you the second option here to open the target PDF and print those. If you're going to do this on a regular basis, then make sure you have those in the box with the scanner. And your target should be between 1.5 to 3 meters away from the scanner. And the scanner should be roughly leveled. So you can use the onboard inclinometer or do it by eye. So here looks like a typical setup on site. So we've got the scanner roughly centered around the center point of this target. We're connected to the laptop, so within proximity, and we've got 4 targets out there. We align the center of the scanner roughly with the center of one of the targets, and then when you're ready, you click Scan and Compensate. And that will rotate the scanner, and it will do the scanning and the compensating based on the target positions. And after around 13 minutes, you'll then get back the data, and it will tell you whether there are any significant or insignificant improvements. So you can see here, we've saved 10 degrees there, typically 8 degrees there, and 5 degrees there. You can then choose on those values whether to apply that compensation or not. So if ever you worry about the accuracy or the compensation of your scanner, you've got the ability to do this on site now. Or if it's used in an environment or it takes a knock or a bash, you can check the compensation. And then once you've applied it, you then get a compensation applied message, so you can then carry on and do the job in hand. So that covers all the new features that we implemented in Scene 6.1 and all the new features that we implemented or have implemented in Scene 6.2. So I'd now like to hand over to Katrin to see whether we've got any questions in the Q&A chat window.
Yeah, thanks, Simon, for this really great overview on the latest scene features you have outlined in the last 50 minutes. It was really great to see which enhancements have been embedded here. I would just take a look to our chat window right now if you have received any questions so far. Second. So if you still have open questions, feel free to direct them to us now because we're still available. So far, I can see no questions that did arrive. So I suggest to wait another 15 to 30 seconds to see if someone still has an open question. One information from my side again. I think I'm not sure if you have already covered this. Coming to the on-site compensation, you just explained at the end. This is available for our new laser scanner series, the FocusS series, as you may have heard about already. We plan to have a webinar covered showing the new features of the FocusS scanner series in January, and in January we will also take a look on the on-site compensation again in more detail. So if you like to join this webinar, we are pleased to get you invited, and hope you will be our guest in this next webinar too. So just to take a look to the chat window again. Still no questions did arrive. So I think we are good at this point. Thanks again for your attention in this call. Thanks again, Sai, for this great presentation. And when you have when you are interested in receiving an software update, or if you would like to receive a price information for the scene software, feel free to send us a message or give us a call. The contact data, at least from the email side, would be the general contact data would be info.emia@faro.com, and if you want to address us via phone, just take a look on our website and contact us with the given information there. So thanks again. Have a good evening and a good day if you are listening from US and or the American side. Yeah. Thank you. Goodbye.